Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Prophecy Update. As always, it's our desire to bring the events that are happening in the world from a biblical perspective and also a prophetic perspective. So thanks for joining us this week. What we want to look at is what's going on in Israel. Many of us in America have heard that, oh my goodness, Israel's going to civil war and everyone's mad at Benjamin Netanyahu and his cabinet and the coalition that he's formed, and oh my goodness, democracy is going to end in Israel, and everything's going crazy, and the Air Force and reservists, they won't serve, and all this mess, okay? And here's what you have to realize. It's a lie. It's propaganda. And we're going to talk about it this prophecy update because I think it's important us to know that a division is happening in Israel, and you must understand how this division eventually leads into the split in Israel between those who do a deal with the Antichrist and those who don't, and then eventually that split goes on into seeing itself come to fruition in the tribulation period, where 2/3 of Israel refuses to believe in the Messiah and 1/3 of Israel will. And so this growing division in Israel is starting to happen, and a lot of the division is fostered by the hard left in Israel. So let's take a look at it during this week's prophecy update. So as I said, many out there, especially the media in Israel, and you got to remember the media in Israel is a propaganda media. Just like we have in America, it's all propaganda. They have the same problem in Israel, okay? And they're claiming that the current domestic policy that was introduced by the Netanyahu coalition has been the worst crisis Israel has ever faced. Yeah, that's the things they say. So let me show you some articles of how crazy this is, right? And again, this is all propaganda, okay? Understanding it's coming from the left, but you've got to see some of these articles and what they're doing to hype up the whole thing. This is from the Jerusalem Post. Israel's center must unite to prevent a civil war. Or how about this one from Haaretz? Crisis, coup, dictatorship, Netanyahu's assault on Israel's democracy, the protest movement, and what's next. How about this one from Haaretz? And remember, Haaretz is just liberal, leftist, okay? Protest and civil disobedience to continue to escalate through the summer because all of what Netanyahu's doing and the conservatives, what they're doing, right? How about this one? Israeli doctors hold warning strike, caution that judicial overhaul threatens the healthcare system. And really what these crazy leftist doctors in Israel have done, saying we're not going to treat patients until this government stops doing what they're doing, especially on the judicial reform. Can you believe that? Anyway, how about this one from Haaretz? Most extreme right-wing religious coalition in Israel's history are sworn in. The most extreme. Really? I can tell you this. They're the most conservative. They're the most biblically oriented Israel has ever seen, by the way. It is the left who continues to say crazy things like this. Anyway, is Israel on the brink of a civil war? No, that's all propaganda, but that's, again, what they say. And then you start hearing some of the leftists in Israel, right? Here's from the Times of Israel. This is Professor Haggai Levine, or Haggai. Anyway, he goes, the Israel government is controlled by dangerous extremists that support discrimination against women, the elderly, Arabs, secular people, and homosexuals. How about this one from Benjamin Pogrund from The Guardian? He lives in Israel, and he goes, I have long rejected the claims that Israel is an apartheid state. Now I believe that is where it is heading because of the new judicial reforms. I mean, this insane language, right? Inflammatory language. How about this one? Robbie Greengrass from the Times of Israel. It's awful that reservists have declared their wish to stay home for 1 month a year rather than prop up a government that wishes to undermine their democratic right to influence the authorities, sending them to war. That's not true. I'll explain that in just a bit. He's lying. He continues on. Is there a non-disruptive way of fighting the government? Stop going about the way we're protesting. There is no nice way to fight the government. You either acknowledge that you're fighting what we see as an illegitimate and perilous policy by the government, or you don't. There is no gentle way of fighting a government that is happy to ignore gentle protest. Yeah, right. How about this leftist propaganda? Michael Boydin. Israel is a sinking ship unless there is a serious change in the government policy. And the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox, and the religious zealots are stopped from holding the nation to ransom by manipulating a dysfunctional electoral system. Israel has no future. What a just crazy propaganda. What a crazy thing to say. But again, what are they doing? Fanning the flames. How about this? Sarah Mann. A new fresh hell is raising its head in my country. Attempts to roll back women's rights. Slowly but surely, this creeping extremism. By the extremism, she means biblical values, by the way. That's how leftist she is. Creeping extremism has found its way into Tel Aviv. Can you imagine the gay capital of the world that they want to make it? I can't believe it. A bastion of liberalism. No, a bastion of leftism. A bastion of ungodlyism, Sarah Mann. But anyway, a city that is young, dynamic, modern, and secular. That's right, secular and ungodly is what you should say. A city that prides itself on acceptance, right, of wokeism and alternative lifestyles, as they call her, Sodom and Gomorrah, whatever you want to call it, Sarah Mann. A city I call home because regardless of one's sex, race, religion, or sexuality, all can feel comfortable living here. And so this is all threatened because of the conservative, Bible-believing, Bible-following elements of Israel. And then she continues on and says, imagine my horror and the horror of every woman I know to learn of two separate incidents that have occurred in the last couple of months where young women have been publicly shamed for the clothes they choose to wear. You know what happened on those two things? The bus drivers and the people that work for Israel said, hey man, you need to cover up, you're immodest. That's what they said. And this is Sarah Mann, the sky is falling, Chicken Little thing, you know. And then you have, of course, the leftists in America joining in on this. New York Mayor Eric Adams to meet leaders of the pro-democracy movement. The pro-democracy movement? No, I'm sorry. But again, they're leftists. And so a leftist in America is meeting up with a leftist, of course. That's the problem. So all of these lies and propaganda coming from the left, what is it about? Well, it's a division from the left to conservatism in Israel about, that the judicial arm of their three branches is going to be restrained by this new conservative coalition. And what's really been happening in Israel is judicial activism like we have here in America, where guys get put into positions as judges, and then they legislate from the bench. And they overrule people who vote politicians in, and the politicians make the law, and they pass the law, and then the judges don't like it, and they say it's unreasonable, and they just strike it down. And so the judicial reforms that needed to happen, this is what this is over, because the conservatives in the Israeli government want to curtail this because these guys are a bunch of leftists doing all kinds of crazy stuff that hurts Israel and that harms Israel, and quite frankly, messes up the democratic process of people electing parties in their parliament government to do what they want and to pass certain laws, and then all of a sudden some judicial activists can just change it. That's kind of what happened in California as an example. California, back in 2008, voted against gay marriage. The majority won. But you know what happened? A judge ruled that we were all wrong who voted against gay marriage. And a judge, one guy, overruled millions of votes. And that's what happened in California. That's called judicial activism. Well, that's what's happening in Israel. And so Netanyahu and his conservative coalition got voted in democratically, and basically taken over the government in that sense, and wanting to reform this, wanting to stop this part of Israel's out of control. And again, it doesn't strip the courts of their rights to do anything. It curtails their ability to strike down governmental actions as the individual deems unreasonable. Okay, so basically on the books, these activist judges can say, well, this law that you passed is unreasonable. I'm going to strike it down, and it's no good anymore. And that's what they're trying to eliminate. That this overriding clause is a problem, and they wanted to rescind it. And look, Netanyahu and his coalition that used this as part of their platform, and the left in Israel were against it. And guess who won? Well, the conservatives won in Israel, okay? And this is not something, this is what people voted on. This is who passed it. The people wanted this. They wanted judicial reform, and that's why the coalitions won, partly one of the reasons why. It was passed by a majority of 64 votes in the Knesset, okay? And Joe Biden goes, well, it passed only by the slimmest margins. No, you're wrong. This is what the coalition said they were going to do, and people voted for that. And by the way, the left ran, against it, opposing judicial reform, and they lost. So the people voted, and democracy is having its way, and then the courts and the left just don't like that. It's kind of like what you're seeing in America. They don't like how we vote. They don't like that we would vote them out of office, and so they rig our elections. They make sure that someone like Donald Trump, who's running for president, is not going to be able to run. They're going to, 4 indictments, whatever. And whether you like Donald Trump or not, that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is what's happening in America is happening in Israel. They do not like people voting and getting in the way of their agenda. And that's what Netanyahu and his coalition are doing, okay? And anyway, so they start doing this propaganda stuff, right? And along with the media, like America's media, the propaganda arm of the left, you got people like former Prime Minister Ehud Barak. That dude's nuts, by the way. And along with the Israeli propaganda media in opposition to this. And they already started staging their so-called civil war opposition, protest propaganda, even before the coalition was sworn into office. They had already planned that they were going to do this, right? And again, the current protest that you see in Israel is coming from the left, the hard left, and it was planned and financed before Bibi's government was even sworn into office, for goodness sake. So this is not some organic thing and people just don't like the government and, oh my goodness, it's a tragedy, yada. It's the same thing they've done in America. With whether it's January 6th or whatever, oh my goodness, these Trumpers are out of control. Bibi's the most extreme. These people who vote for Bibi are extreme. No, actually, it's the majority of Israel. And by the way, it's the majority in America. But the left, like in America and Israel, has the power and the purse string in a lot of times. And that's what's happening. So this hard left group that they call themselves the pro-democracy group are nothing but hard leftists, okay? And not only just hard leftists, many of them see Israel. These are Jewish people that don't even see that they have a right to the land. They even call themselves that we're the occupiers. And you're like, wow, you're like kind of like George Soros. What do you mean this is your homeland? God gave you your homeland, and you call yourself an occupier, that the nation of Israel is an occupier? That's a weird thing for me to understand, and a weird thing for a lot of us to understand, but it shows you the ideology of the left, and it doesn't matter. It just messes your mind and creates mush up there to where you don't even think. You're self-hating, in that way. Anyway, I like the article, and I would advise you to read this. It's a good article on the website Israelis 365, and it was Rabbi Peshach Wolicki who wrote the article, and it's a great article. How should Christians think about the crisis in Israel? And it was an excellent article. Let me go through it a little bit with you, and it gives us some good insight to what's going on. And he points out a long history about this division in Israel, okay? And this is good. He goes, beginning with the first Zionist Congress in 1897 through to the present day, he goes, there's always been two distinct ideologies in Israel, and they both refer to themselves as Zionism. Now, this is interesting. And he goes on to say there's the Zionism of Theodor Herzl, and you guys have studied Israel, you know about Theodor Herzl of the Zionist movement. But Theodor Herzl and many of his people that envisioned, establishing a Jewish state, envisioned a secular state, okay, that would serve as a homeland for the Jewish people, not a biblical state. Not a state where people follow the scriptures and follow what the Torah says or not. They envisioned a secular state where the Jewish people could live, okay? And it's worth noting, he points out that in Herzl's famous book, envisioning this kind of secular nation state, it was called Der Judenstaat, which meant the Jews' state, not the Jewish state, but the Jew state. Anyway, Herzl mentions that his vision was not a Jewish state where the Jewish faith and tradition would flourish. No, according to the rabbi in the article, he says that Herzl was not even interested in the fulfillment of biblical prophecies, of the ingathering of Israel, or anything like that. Him and these atheistic secular leaders of the Zionist movement in the late 1800s, which included a vast majority, he says, of the founders of the state, were basically not interested in creating a religious Judaism in Israel. In fact, he says they were even hostile to it. They didn't want a society based on biblical values and Torah law. Now, that's interesting. Okay, so you have this secular Zionism wanting a land for the Jews, okay, that Herzl and these secular atheistic Jews wanted. And then alongside that, he says you had religious Zionism, okay? So secular Zionism and then religious Zionism. And he goes, this movement, again, alongside the secular Zionist movement, this movement saw that the return to Israel basically was the beginning process of the redemption of Israel, which were foretold by the prophets in the Bible, okay? And then the rabbi points out Deuteronomy 30, and it says this, even if you are scattered to the ends of the heavens, from there the Lord your God will gather you, and there he will bring you. Then the Lord your God will bring you to the land which your fathers possessed, and you shall possess it. And he will make you more prosperous and more numerous than your fathers. And so that's true. But here's what happens. The prophets do say that there will be two returns of the nation of Israel from the nations. And some of the prophets mention that they will be gathered out of the nations in unbelief for judgment. Okay, so this is what the rabbi is missing. Okay, and then the other second return back into the land is, again, out of the nations, but back in the land in belief. Okay, and what those two returns have to do with, according to the prophets, is one is return out of the nations for judgment, the tribulation, Jacob's trouble, which the rabbi's not incorporating. And then the second regathering of the Jews has to do with the scattering that happens by the Antichrist. And then Jesus, at the second coming, sends out the angels to gather the elect. The elect is Israel. Gather the elect and bring them back, but they're in belief now because they've been saved during the tribulation period. So again, the rabbi is not including that, but he at least understands that there's a spiritual significance to bringing Israel back. And ultimately, it does lead to the redemption, but there's going to be two returns, basically. But anyway, this understanding, this religious understanding by Judaism, of the restoration of Israel, they're on the right track in that sense. Okay, so anyway, he goes on and says that this religious Zionism in Israel believes in there's going to be a great future, and it's true in that sense. They're going to have to go through Jacob's trouble, but it pictures the Messianic kingdom is really what it does. And so, but for them in their mindset, that this modern state is going to turn into this kind of messianic kingdom without having to go through the tribulation or Jacob's trouble or whatever. So anyway, it's missing a few things, but nonetheless, they believe, the religious element of Israel believes that, hey, this is part of the prophet's teaching, And it's the ingathering of the Jews. There's going to be a spiritual awakening, which I would agree, but that happens in the tribulation. And they're going to have fully returned to God, which they will. The remnant will come to faith. All of Israel will be saved. And so fulfilling end time prophecies, okay? So even us as Christian Zionists can agree with the religious Zionists of Israel that we're on the same page in many regards. That this is biblically significant that they're in the land, and it's going to lead eventually to their salvation and obviously the Messianic kingdom. Okay, so you and I have a lot in common with that. But you and I do not have a lot in common with the secularism or the leftism that's going on in Israel. And that's where this whole little debate going on about the judicial reforms, this is what's at the core of understanding Israel. And he goes on, it's interesting to have a little bit of history, and this is good stuff. I like it. He goes, from the late 1800s through the 1970s, the secular Zionists held full control over the entire Zionist enterprise. So that's interesting. I didn't know that. And he goes, while religious and secular Zionists basically cooperated in the building of the state, and they fought wars together, he said, and they sang the same national anthem, but he says their ideologies never aligned. Okay. So there's this split in Israel, okay? The ideology. Bible followers versus secularists, okay? And he goes, the ideological disagreement between the two Zionists, he said it didn't affect the practical governing of the state because of all the levers of power were entirely in the hands of the secular faction, I should say. But here's the interesting thing. He says over the course of the last 4 decades, Israel's society has become steadily more traditional, religious, and politically right-wing, which would totally make sense. If you're going to get more religious, more Bible following, right, you're going to gravitate politically to the right. That's just natural. The conservative element has more to do with the biblical principles than any ideology out there, right? So we would all understand that. That's why, like in America, when someone says, I'm a Christian and I vote Democratic, I want to say, what's wrong with you? Everything on the Democratic platform is anti-biblical. I don't agree with everything the conservatives do, and I'm more conservative than the conservatives, right? But they're closer to me, so I don't get this mentality of Christians voting Democrat or being liberal or being leftist. I don't get that at all. It's a disconnect from what the Bible teaches. So anyway, it makes sense that if the Jewish people are getting more closer to the Bible and becoming more religious, of course it would end up being more conservative in their politics. And hence, that's why Netanyahu and his coalition are voted in. Okay? That's what's really happening politically. Okay? And this is interesting. He says it's a reversal of what many Westerners are accustomed to. Because the younger Israelis tend to be right-wing and more conservative than their parents, can you believe it? And their grandparents. It's the reverse here in America. So this is interesting. Very interesting what's going on here. And he goes, the left-wing secular political parties have become less and less powerful as the years have passed. And an interesting thing to note this, that there was a study done on this, and according to the Israel Democracy Institute, get this, 73% of the Jewish Israelis between 18 and 24 identify as right-wing. Does that not blow you away? That blows me away. Because in America, I mean, it's like 1% of ages 18 to 24 would even claim to be Bible-believing Christians or born again. So they're having a reversal. And I think the fullness of the Gentiles, as Paul pictured in Romans, the fullness will come to an end. And then God's going to pick up that program with Israel. So I find that pretty amazing that the young people in Israel, 73% are conservative. That blows me away. Could you imagine if the young people in America, 73% of the young people in America were conservative? It'd be a whole new ball game. right? And now here's the interesting thing too. Note this. So 73% of the Jewish Israelis between 1824 are right-wing, compared to only 46% of the Jewish Israelis over 65. Okay? So only 46% of them over 65 are that way. It's weird. Anyway, 62% of Israeli Jews define themselves as being right. Now think about that. 62%. That's a big majority of the population considers themselves right. So if that's the case statistically, then what should we expect from the politics? We should expect to see Netanyahu get in there and a conservative coalition. What he notes, and this is interesting, in response to this shift that's going on in Israel, the liberal secular left has sought to retain its grip on its power. It doesn't want to lose it. And what it did is it sought to retain its power through the judiciary branch of its government. So the rabbi takes us back to 1990, and he says, you know what was going on back then? In the Israeli Supreme Court start amassing authorities that it was never intended to have. And he goes on, he says, to cite the most prominent and egregious example, they invented a rule that allows the court to strike down any decision, administratively or otherwise, and made by any government body solely on the basis of the decision appearing to be, quote unquote, unreasonable to these crazy left-wing judges. Okay? So this undefined and wide-ranging power, as he's pointing out, basically has essentially allowed the secular left-wing court to strike down regulations, appointments, and even laws passed by the legislature at will. They just do it. Just like I said, in California, what they did here. And he goes on, he says this, on many occasions, this power has been used to prevent the religiously observant community in Israel from living according to its values. Well, of course. So you have a leftist judge that hates biblical values and is going to rule against any legislation that's going to go to help the religious community, he's going to nullify. Of course. It's the same thing that happens here in America. And that's what the issue is in Israel. Okay. So basically, to understand what's going on in Israel, there's no civil war. He says the current struggle in Israel is an expression of this process. That the century-old conflict between Herzl's secular Zionist vision and the religious Zionism of Deuteronomy 30 lies basically at the heart of the judicial reform debate. That's what it's about. And again, it's people wanting to follow the Bible, people wanting to follow, secular society. Now, this is interesting. He goes, the powerful secular minority that still controls, think about this, the mainstream media, the courts in Israel, the academia in Israel, and most of the top positions in the military realize they're losing their hold on Israeli culture and society because it's shifting conservative. It's shifting to the Bible-oriented kind of mindset. And that's a good thing, right? He says it's a good thing. I agree. That's a good thing. Because the closer they get to the Bible, which is a good thing, the closer, if they can take that stair step towards the Bible and saying this is God's word, and then take it seriously, then that obviously can lead them to possibly seeing their Messiah, right? Jesus of Nazareth being their long-awaited Messiah. Going away from the Bible is taking them away and taking the Jewish people away and blinding them. So this is a good thing that this is happening in Israel. I believe it's a spiritual aspect because of the fullness of the Gentiles is ending. And then once we're raptured, we're out of here, and God's going to start the program with Israel. Well, these young people, 70-something, 72, 73% of them are conservative and want to follow the Bible. I think you're starting to see something here of the 144,000. Maybe some of those conservatives in those younger groups would be some of the 144,000, or would be saved through the preaching of the 144,000, or the two witnesses, or whatever. You could totally see that happening. So it's very encouraging to see that in that regard. But anyway, that's what this fight is over. And then what they have done is using the propaganda, they've politicized the military in Israel, okay? So you might have seen that, oh my goodness, the Air Force pilots are not going to fly for Israel. It's just bogus. What's happening is this coup, really, of Netanyahu is led by Barak. He's the former IDF chief of staff. And this guy's crazy, man, by the way. And then he has some former generals and security officials who are just left-wing, crazy reservists, right? And many of them are retired, by the way. And like I said, the older part of Israel is more leftist, right, than the younger. And so they have threatened, we're going to not serve if these judicial reforms are not removed, and if these things are passed, we're just not going to we're not going to serve. And so these reservists, including Air Force pilots, are threatening not to show up and disobey their orders to protect Israel against Hezbollah, Hamas, Iran. And so we're going to hold the nation captive until the government changes and stops its reforms. And, oh, yeah, we're not going to protect you, by the way. It's just stupid lies. And they're saying, well, we got a list of 20,000 pilots that have signed on that they're not going to fly. And they've signed a petition. And the problem is, it's all bogus. It's all a lie. It's not true. They do not have a list of 20,000 pilots. They're making it up. I want you to listen to an interview that Carolyn Glick, if you want to know what's going on in the Middle East, with Israel particularly, listen to Carolyn Glick. She's excellent, man. So she's going to interview IAF Reserve Major this is the Israeli Air Force, right? Shai Kalach. He's an F-16 pilot, and he basically exposed that this is just utter falsity. It's an empty threat. It's nothing behind it. It's a psyops. It's propaganda. Anyway, listen to this. It's about 5 to 7 minutes long, but it's important that you hear this to hear the truth.
You know, we are dealing now with, I would say, a psychological warfare. But I think that before we are going to deal with the refusal, we have to differentiate between, I would say, the virtual reality and the actual reality. Today, we can see that we have almost daily, maybe, every 2 days, we have a letter. It's a letter of kind of operational malachim, headquarters that not even exist. And, without any names, just, the first letters, the initial letters.
The initials.
Yeah, the initials. And
these are anonymously signed group letters by people claiming to be pilots, claiming to be special forces operators, claiming to be all kinds of whatever special unit reservists. And they're without their names. They're just anonymous with, if I were signing it, it would be, CBG, right? Signing it as opposed to my name, or CG. And same with you, you'd be SK. So it's all these initials, and nobody will tell you who they are.
And not just that, but also without any presenters that can be interviewed and it always published by the same reporters. So this is the method, pilots.
So they're all retired people.
All retired. So this is how the petition, this is how the propaganda looks like.
And they sign anonymously to make you think that they're stopped.
And sometimes anonymously.
So it's a stage managed play. I mean, it's all fiction.
It's a fiction. And so this is, I think, the virtual reality. There was a conference of 400 pilots, active pilots, they didn't want to refuse. They were settled, they were called by Amir Eshel just to hear about the reform. But
Amir Eshel is the former Air Force commander who was Benny Gantz's Director General of the Ministry of Defense when he was defense minister.
I'm very glad that you mentioned it, because this is part of the fiction. I mean that, there is an expression in Hebrew called alei te'ena.
Yeah, they're the fig leaves.
Yeah,
it's also in English.
They came to hear about the reform. They came to hear about the judicial reform, and then those manipulators use it to frighten the public.
Right, they had
to say, I have 400 pilots were about to refuse to serve. Nonsense.
They brought 4 propagandists for the left's campaign against the judicial reform to speak with them. Avichai Mandelblit, the former attorney general, who was the one who concocted all of the fake indictments against Netanyahu, and also said that we're on the verge of no longer being a democracy if this passes. I mean, pure nonsense. Roni Al-Sheikh, the former police commissioner, who was just exposed as a liar, who did wholesale use of counterterrorism.
Who has a degree of allergy.
Right, spying technologies against Netanyahu's top aides and his children and wife. Okay, completely illegal, right? And he's the one who's talking to 400 pilots about the legal reforms. And then Susie Navot from the Israel Democracy Institute, which is one of the organizations on the far left that's been pushing the whole anti-reform thing. And Rosnei, right? I think another professor who's totally, an activist.
I knew about Mandelblit and also Sheikh, but so this is all about.
And that's all they had. So it wasn't actually a conference on the legal reform. It was an indoctrination session to try to get these 400 pilots to walk away from.
There is no an actual refusal, and there won't be in a war. We have to know that there won't be any form of refusal in a war. Now we have to understand that we are situated, we are in the midst of psychological warfare. This is all about, I mean that the head of the petition, the chaos agents sent their reporters, that report without any, how do you call it, ethical...
they don't care about the truth.
Yeah, the journalistic ethics. I know they break it, degraded maybe the journalistic ethics.
We don't have media in Israel. We have propaganda.
As a journalist, you can share with us that you have to first and foremost check the sources and then the names, and you have to develop kind of I would say a critical sense. Okay, and they lost it.
Almost. I'm actually been surprised by the velocity of the return of this phenomenon in the news. Right, where you see that every news show essentially has been opening for the past, like a week, I think, with these pilots and special operators. And they're trying to drum up panic yesterday. And after we talk about what's actually happening, I want to move to what the IDF is doing, because but it seems like the general staff is sort of going along with this, where these people are trying to tear apart the army, and the IDF, rather than standing up to them, is catering to them. And now they're telling us, look, Hezbollah can attack your kids, and we're not going to protect you. We're endangering your elderly mother. We're threatening your children. We're threatening you. We're threatening your lives because we don't like the way the government is operating. And if they don't change their ways, then your kids are going to be under threat. And if you want to protect your children, then you better tell Netanyahu and his ministers that they have to shelve the legislation that they were elected to advance, to pass. So that's exactly what they're saying. Nice family you got there. It'd be a shame if something happened to it.
So as you can see, with Caroline talking to Shai, it's a lie. It's not true. It's false. It's propaganda meant to divide Israel, meant to, we're having a civil war. Anyway, there's another thing I want to point out. It's from another article by Alex Trayman of Israel 365. And I want you to hear what he says about the difference between the secular left and the religious element of Israel and what's going on here, because I think it sheds light on biblical prophecy just a little bit. He goes on and he says in this article, he says, Israel's right wing sees the country as ultimately standing alone. Now that's interesting, both in the region and on the global scale. That's interesting because we all know, studying prophecy, Zechariah chapter 12, that Israel will stand alone, right? It's predicted to stand alone. Now here's the interesting thing. So the religious element is seeing itself as standing alone already, okay? It views Israel as a nationalistic entity with firm sovereign rights in Judea and Samaria, which is true. The West Bank, as it's called, which is not, it shouldn't be called that. It should be called Judea and Samaria, is Israel's. They're right. Israel's right wing, the religious element, is correct, and they believe that and their nation must maintain strong borders because it serves as a protectorate of the Jewish traditions. And they're right. I would agree with them. But then he contrasts that with Israel's left wing. Okay? Israel's left wing sees the state as an extension of Western Europe on the Eastern Mediterranean that fosters a secular and liberal haven, encourage progressive expressions, and serves as the incubator for a startup economy. Now that's interesting that he would say that, because that element will be the element that does the deal with the Antichrist. Because, we know that in the big scheme of things, in prophecy, that we're currently right now in Daniel's two-legged stage of Rome. And you have the western leg and you have the eastern leg, and I've taught on this before. The western leg is centered in Germany, France, and Spain, and Great Britain, in that area. And then the eastern leg is centered in Russia. Okay, that's where the balances of power are. Well, we know that what Russia wants is nationalistic Russia to control basically everything, a totalitarian state controlled by Russia. But then you have on the Western side them wanting basically totalitarianism, but on a global scale, right? And we know that coming out of Western Europe is the desire for globalism, the Klaus Schwabs of the World Economic Forum, all of that. And so the left wing of Israel is in concert with that element. And we already know when the two legs move into the next transition, which will be global government, we already know who wins. It's not Putin. Putin won't win. It's the globalists that will win, because we go to a global government next. Okay, so that element that Israel's left sides with is eventually going to be where the global government comes, but then the global government produces the 10 kings and then produces the Antichrist. Hence, I want you to see the trail. If the left of Israel is in concert with Western Europe and sees itself as a secular liberal haven that wants progression and wants globalism and yada, 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 then that is the element that Daniel is referring to as the many, not the all of Israel, but the many who do a covenant with the Antichrist. Whereas the religious element, he's saying, is we see us standing alone. We see we must protect our borders, and we need to do everything we can to do that to protect our traditions and way of life as Bible-believing Jews. There you go. That, guys, is a pattern that's moving into the future. I think that you and I can watch. And this split is happening currently as we speak. There's no civil war, but it's the split in Israel. And we know where this split goes. 2/3 of Israel, according to the prophet Zechariah, 2/3 of Israel die because of the tribulation. But why? Because it's those 2/3 that refuse to come to faith in the Messiah. They accept the Antichrist, and of course he turns on them like a sheep-killing dog at the midpoint of the tribulation and tries to wipe out every Jew. And so according to Zechariah 13, 2/3 of Israel eliminated. The ones that are eliminated are the unbelieving elements of Israel. What makes it out is the 1/3. That 1/3 is the believing element of Israel that comes to faith in the Messiah, and it's that 1/3 that's left that becomes, as Paul says, all of Israel. In fact, the prophets like Isaiah put together the remnant of Israel and their redemption with the all of Israel concept, which makes total sense. If 2/3 of Israel is eliminated and all you have is 1/3, that is all of Israel. And so all of Israel is one and the same with the remnant of Israel. And so what we're seeing develop in the nation of Israel right now is a development of the believing remnant, possibly, that you will see come to faith in the Messiah. That movement towards the Bible, that movement towards God. It's just they're stair-stepping. And we see more Jews coming to faith in the Messiah now, right? The Messianic movement, than we've ever had, right? Than ever. And it's a big deal. That's a big deal. And of course, they're going to be raptured, but we're looking at this other element that's going to be left behind because they haven't come to faith in Messiah, but they're moving towards the Bible. And I think that movement towards the Bible allows them, a better environment, more conducive to come to faith in the Messiah, rather than someone that's turned their back and says, I want to follow the secular worldview and whatever that brings, which is going to bring the Antichrist, right, and progressivism and fascism and all that stuff. That person's more than likely to side with the Antichrist. Now, again, I'm not saying these people over here can't be saved. I'm not saying that, and I'm not saying there will be secular Jews that get saved. No doubt about that. There's going to be a lot of things. But who has the greater potential? Think about it in our own lives. Who has the greater potential of getting saved? Yes, anyone can get saved, but is it going to be somebody sitting in church maybe and hearing it, and finally it clicks? Who knows? It takes sometimes 7 times to hear the gospel, or somebody that's not. Again, we're not saying people that don't go to church or whatever can't be saved. What I'm saying is, if you raised your child, what would you do? Would you rather have them in church hearing the Word of God every day? Or would you rather have them out there playing soccer on Sunday morning? Who has the better chance of getting saved? That's right. It's the one who's in the environment more, right? So that's my argument. That's what I'm trying to say. We would do that with our own kids, right? So this is interesting. And I think we need to watch this. And I find this fascinating. Because, our hope is Israel gets saved, as the Apostle Paul said. We love Israel. We are pro-Israel, as you guys know, and you are too, the remnant. We understand God's plan and purpose. And I think it's very exciting to see that this growing biblical view is growing in Israel, and the left is kicking and screaming. You have to lie, you have to do propaganda, say we're at a civil war, oh my goodness, it's all over, when really it's the opposite. This marginal group is getting older and less of the population, while the growing majority of Israel's population is getting more Bible oriented. I think that's great. So here's the thing, let's keep watching. So I'm going to end on this. One of the guys that introduced me to the Jewish background in the Bible early on in my walk with the Lord was Zola Levitt. You guys remember Zola Levitt? Phenomenal ministry. I missed the guy so much. He went home to be with the Lord, as you guys know. And used to watch his program, get his materials and stuff like that. But I was fascinated with the Jewish background. And Zola was a Messianic believer. As you guys remember, but he would always leave his shows and he would say, Sha'alu Shalom Yerushalayim, pray for the peace of Israel. And I think I'm going to end on that, as Zola would. Let's pray for the peace of Israel, because the peace of Israel is not the peace militarily. The peace of Israel is the Messiah and the shalom that Messiah brings to the nation of Israel when they accept their Jewish Messiah, as we have. So let's continue to pray for Israel, support her, and let's watch this growing interest about this Bible-believing element starting to take a grip in Israel's nation. Pretty cool stuff. Anyway, a couple announcements before we go. Make sure you have our app. Our app is fantastic. It'll help you out. Just get your app on your phone, on your tablet or your iPad, whatever, and you can get all the latest updates of things we post and whatnot. Make sure you have that. Make sure you're on our text alert system so we can alert you to different things that are going on in our ministry. And then also continue to pray for us, as always. We're just moved into our building, and it's brand new, and we're in there. And God bless you guys for helping us out. Now we got to pay the bills. Now we got to pay the loan off, so we got a loan to pay off. So if the Lord puts it on your heart to help us financially, we could use the help in paying off the loan. Or you can help us to continue this ministry online as we minister around the world to be able to do this. And just continue to keep the lights on. Anyway, remember what the Lord said. When you see these things begin to happen, look up, lift up your heads, for your redemption draws near. God bless you. We'll see you next time.